Hello everyone, my name is Alex Legenhausen. Previously on this channel, I've talked about issues of child labor around chocolate companies. If you have not seen them, the main point of the first video was that well-known chocolate companies like Nestle, Hershey, and Mars buy their cocoa from farms in the Ivory Coast, many of which exploit child workers. These farms use child workers because they are intensely pressured by global corporations to sell their chocolate for dirt cheap prices. The farms economically need to hire child workers that they pay pennies a day just to stay in business and keep themselves afloat. The issue of child labor has been going on in the chocolate industry for a long time. In 2001, chocolate companies realized that many of their chocolate was being farmed from children. This led them to make the Haring-Engel Protocol. This protocol was an agreement between large multinational chocolate corporations to try to limit child labor practices going on in their cocoa farms. In 2001, there was an estimated about 1 million people or children working on cocoa farms. However, this protocol failed. According to a 2019 article by the Washington Post, they estimated about 2.4 million children working on cocoa farms. Just to give you an idea of the kind of labor these kids are doing, it's pretty bad, to say the least. Most of this stuff would not be tolerated in any developed country. Most of the kids live on their farms and they're separated from their families. So this means that they're not working for their family farm, they're working for someone unrelated to them. Some of these kids have not seen their family in years and were sold as basically slaves to farm owners. These kids are in constant threat of violence if they try to leave or contact their families. About 40% of the kids that one journalist interviewed said that they were physically punished when they tried to leave, and over 60% of them said that they were threatened with violence if they tried to leave. These kids work full-time and are not allowed to go and get an education. This keeps them in a perpetual cycle of being impoverished with no choice but to work on these farms. Just to put things into a more understandable perspective, imagine if adults were not allowed to leave a factory that they worked in, or else the foreman would hit them. We would all think that is totally awful and would call it slavery, as it is. And these are how kids between 10 and 16-year-olds live every day of their life. Now, the work they do is also very dangerous. Kids use chainsaws to cut down trees, which is obviously incredibly dangerous. Many of the kids, their job is to climb the cocoa trees and cut down the seeds with large, heavy machetes. To put things in context, they are about the same age as a fourth grader doing this kind of dangerous work. So if you wouldn't trust an elementary school student doing this work, then we should not be asking these kids to do this. This actually goes against the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, which was signed by almost all of the countries in the UN, except America, for some reason. I'll talk about the human rights implications of them doing this kind of work and violating international treaty in another video. These kids also use pesticides, herbicides, and other dangerous chemicals that have been scientifically proven to cause cancer, birth defects, lung disease, and heart disease, and many other negative long-term health consequences. If you ever use things like cleaning supplies, do stuff like leave the door open or not spray too much, and to go outside and take a breather every once in a while, because these chemicals are bad for you, and you're inhaling them if you're in a confined bathroom. Imagine a third grader spraying all these dangerous chemicals on plants all day long without them even knowing that the health consequences that they're going to face. These things are obviously all horrible, But the reason why this keeps happening is because there's no oversight. There are a few fair trade foundations that are supposed to be investigating these small farms, but they are incredibly underfunded. One report said that one foundation got as little as $5,000 for their annual budget. Of course, there's a different exchange rate and everything, but $5,000 is obviously not enough to fund a full-time, meaningful workforce to investigate these farms. And when these foundations are able to investigate, the investigations are few and far between. One report said they can visit a farm about once every 4 years, which is obviously not frequent enough. All the people have to do is hide the children for the one day that the investigator comes for a few hours, and then once he leaves, he's good for 4 years. So it's just obvious flaw in what they do. There's also way too many farms that these foundations have to investigate. One study found that there was only 1 in 10 of all the farms that claimed they were fair trade were actually investigated. So this means that they're not even looking at 90% of the farms, but they're all claiming fair trade, and there's nothing they can do to really disprove that because they are so underfunded. They can't hire people to travel to go look at them. So big chocolate companies, they say like, oh, they have a fair trade label on their M&M package, just for an example. But really, like, most of that chocolate has not been investigated at all. And if it was investigated, it could have been investigated 10 years ago, and there's no way to prove it. And then big chocolate corporations are so blatant with their child exploitation, they only say about 50% of their chocolate comes from farms that are investigated by these foundations. So basically, in any random piece of chocolate, there's probably 90% chance that something horrible happened to get you that. So be aware that chocolate companies are trying to dupe you, and basically, if they're not one of the companies that are hammering you over the head that they don't use child exploitation, there's a chance that they use that. So once again, I'm recommending a few ones that I talked about, like Alter Eco, Johnny Doodle. Some other ones are called Divine and Endangered. Those are a few that I found were really proactive with making sure that they got ethical sources. Let's see. And I think to fix this problem, as an individual, you can do is just boycott the companies that we know are bad, like once again Hershey's, Mars, Nestle, Godiva is also one, and buy from the ones that we do know are ethical. It's honestly just like $1 more, and if you have to spend $1 more to prevent child labor, I think that's probably a good trade. But I think in the long term, to really stop this, we have to make some sort of legal legislation. The problem with the Harkin-Engel protocol is that it was a voluntary agreement. This means that there was nothing legally the companies had to do, or any legal punishments that they would be punished with if they didn't follow this. I think, Congress, and they should team up with international companies and say that part of the profits have to be donated to these fair trade foundations, so that way they have much more funding so they can really make sure that there's no child exploitation going on the farms. And they should also split part of their profits with the farms, because that way then we know they'll get enough money to hire adults and use safe practices and so on and so forth. I think it will decrease the overall profits for these companies, but honestly, I feel like the workers there spend so much more time doing hard labor compared to a businessman sitting up on an air-conditioned corporate board. So I think that's a fair trade-off to ask for. I don't really care if a big businessman gets a bigger bonus compared to children being, threatened and hit if they're not working ridiculous 12-hour shifts with dangerous pesticides. So that's all I have to say for this video. Hope maybe convince you to look into this a little bit more, or think about it next time, or maybe tell some of your friends about these practices going on. I hope you all have a nice day.